Hi guys, this is Mark. In this lecture, we will be talking about functions, or specifically codeless functions. If you have programming background, you will certainly understand what functions are. If you don't, that's fine, no problem. I will be describing what functions are and how to work with them, and there will be a demo that will demonstrate how to create, program, and use functions. To provide a definition, I would say that function is a reusable piece of logic. It has a name. It may have 0 or more arguments, and it may or may not have a return value. The power of functions in Codeless is that for any kind of logic that may be used in different places in your application, not necessarily on the same page, multiple pages may be using exactly the same logic. And in that case, it makes perfect sense to take that logic out into a function, and then just from different places wherever you need that functionality, you just call that function. There is one place where that logic is executed. Working with functions is going to be exactly the same as working with other blocks, because whenever you create a function and you define your logic in that function using Codeless, that function itself becomes just a separate block that you can use in your application. In fact, for a few other lectures where we use the playground, we created a Codeless function, which is the function that does the logging. So if you have followed all the lectures along, you already had experience creating a function and using it. Now let's just jump right into UI Builder and see how to create functions and how to use them. So just to cement that understanding and have some hands-on experience. Now that we are in UI Builder, let's take a look at where functions live. The best way to get to functions, if you are in the user interface, is by clicking the Logic tab, and you end up in the interface that has the handlers for whatever the component was selected. But you will see a Functions tab right here, right next to Handlers. If you click on it, this is where your functions will live. The log function is here. That's the function that we created for the playground page. But this is a very good demonstration that functions don't belong to a page. Functions belong to an application. So once you define a function, it will be available for all pages in your application. And as a result, the power of reuse becomes apparent here, because you can just start using this function from anywhere in your app, from all pages. To create a function, down below at the very bottom, you see this green button that says New Function. Before we actually create the function, let me describe the use case that I'm after. I will create a new page because I want to keep my landing page empty. But if you want to use yours, that is fine. So let me just quickly create a page, and I will call it function demo. And in here, I will drag the input component and another one. So 2 input components. The second one I will mark as read only. And the first one, I will set up the data binding for the value logic. And I will name that property input data. Okay. So the function that I will be building in this demonstration will take any text that is entered into this input component, and it will change some of the characters in that input text to uppercase. If you ask me how useful it is, completely useless. If you ask me how useful it is to understand the power of functions, extremely useful, because that's probably like the simplest thing that I came up that has a little bit of complexity, but at the same time really demonstrates what functions are about. So what's going to happen once it is done is I will be able to type any text in this input component. The function will be invoked by the second input component, and it will display that funky text where some, let's say, all the odd positioned characters are changed to uppercase. So that's the use case that we're after. Now that the components are there and we have this data binding, let's switch to logic and go to functions and create our funky function. Let's just call it like that, funky text function. Whenever you give it a name and program that logic and the function is ready, then the function will be available as a block that has this name. So give it a name that really represents what this function is about. And perhaps from that perspective, adding the word function doesn't really make sense. So how about we change it to create funky text? Better. All right, so this is a new interface. You haven't seen it before, specifically on the right-hand side. What's on the left is going to be the same no matter where you go with Codeless. But right here, this is the editor for your function. So in here, you can select the color of your block, and it's not going to be the color here. It's going to be the color once it is published, once it starts, once it becomes available for reuse. So I'll just pick this nice bright green color. I will provide a description. Converts every character in the odd position to uppercase. It is always good to provide a description so you can remind yourself what this function does. Help URL, I'm going to ignore it for now. All right, so how do you define arguments for the function? Because in this case, my function needs to accept text that it will process to create that alternative funky revision of this text. So if you click on this gear icon, you get this little pop-up, and in here, see this little inputs placeholder? You can start dragging this guy into here, and text to convert is going to be the name of my argument. You can add more than one if you'd like. You can add as many as you need, but in this case, I don't need that many. The reason it turned red is because there were two arguments with the same name, and it didn't like it. My function returns a value, and this checkbox represents this. If you are building a function that doesn't return a value, just uncheck, and you see it changes the layout completely. All right, so this is the placeholder for my function. So in here, my algorithm will be to go over every single character in the text to convert parameter and see if the position of this character is odd, then change it to the uppercase. So what I will do is first I will define a variable called result, and that's the variable where I will be accumulating my result, and then once it's done, just return the result right here. In fact, I can do it right now, even before this result is ready. Okay, but first I will initialize my result to be an empty string. Done. Okay. The next thing that I will do is I will start a loop. So this is going to be my loop. It will start from the position number 1, and it will go to the position which is the length of my text, because that's how many iterations of that loop I want to have. There you go. So from 1 to the length of this text. Variable j represents the position. Okay, so now let's do our first logic check. If j is odd, which means that we go to math and we get this is even, it's going to be odd, and we want to put the, actually it's not j, it's actually I, variable I. All right, so here we want to check if variable I is odd, then we want to take the character at this I position and change it to uppercase. To grab this character, we can use this component in text, and this text needs to be text to convert. This can be deleted. We need to get the letter at the position I. So this gives us that character at the position I. And we want to change it to uppercase. Okay. And whatever this uppercase returns is going to go to our result. So if we go to text, and we need to get this block. An item changes to result. So to result, append text, this text. So now we'll already handle all characters in the odd positions. However, there are also characters in the even positions, which means that we need to click on this gear icon and add this else part to it. And the else part to it is going to be almost identical as this guy, except for the uppercase. So copy it, put it into here, disconnect the uppercase, connect this, and the uppercase is deleted. That's all it takes, guys. Very easy. Let me just go over the logic one more time. Initialize the variable result to be an empty string. Start a loop where we go from position 1 to the length of the text that we received to convert. Increment this variable by 1 because we don't want to skip any characters. We check if the position is odd, and in this case we take the character, just one character, from that position. We convert that character to uppercase, and we append that converted character to the variable result. If it is not odd, which means that this else is executed, we still take this character and we append to the result. A little modification that I see from the not so much performance but more brevity is we can introduce a variable which will be called current character. Oh, misspelled it. And this current character can go right into here, and it will be equal to this. Therefore, anywhere where we used to do it can go away, and the current character will be used right here and right here. There you go. I think that looks a little bit better. So we get the current character. In fact, it becomes a lot more readable once we made this change. Don't you agree? So we check if the current position is odd. If it is, we convert the current character to uppercase, append it to the result. Otherwise, we just append the current character to result. When we are done, meaning we went through the entire length of our text to convert, we just return the result. All right. So that's what our function does. Let's go back to our user interface. And in here, we already had data binding configured, input data. So what we need to do is for this input component, we just need to grab that input data and put it through our function. How is it going to work? Let me show it to you. Click on the logic, and then for the value logic, there is no data binding because there is going to be logic. So it's going to be either data binding or logic, and the logic always takes the precedence. So let's add logic for the value for our second input. And in here, what we want to return is now if we go to custom functions, see, we have this create funky text. By the way, see, if you move the mouse over, it actually displays this description that we typed in. So here you sort of provide instructions. Let's say if there is more than one developer on your application and you created those functions, this help becomes quite important because people can see exactly what this function does. But anyway, so now we have this function with this bright green color, exactly how we configured it, that we can use in our logic. So create funky text. Text to convert is going to be the value that now sits in page data through data binding. Let's get that value. It is going to be input data from page data. So this will convert the entered value into the funky text and return it. And that's what's going to be rendered in the second input. Let's just see how well this works. So let's just start entering. This is a normal text that becomes funky. So as you can see, this function is working very well because every other character is turning into uppercase. And that's the power of the function. So now if I create another page or use it in another component here and want to get exactly the same logic, let me actually demonstrate it to you. How about we add text? Okay. And then for this text, let's change the font size to be a little bit bigger. How about 40. And we could use exactly the same content logic. And this, just let's reuse this function and get the value from page data. So this is going to be input data property from page data. That's it. So now we're using exactly the same function to do the conversion for two different components on the same page. Let's rerun it and say now there are two components benefiting from codeless function. There you go. So this is the power of functions right there. Not very useful logic, but very useful concept. I hope you guys find this demonstration useful and you understand and see the value of functions, because the power of reuse is what makes you a better and more powerful and more productive developer. Codeless developer, of course. Thank you for watching this video, guys. And as always, happy codeless coding.